I don't mind waiting a few minutes if you want.
Oh, no, that's okay.
Sure.
Yep. Yeah. There's your, you've got a copy.
I've got a copy here. You keep one for you.
So you reckon the lights
Do you want the water more accessible?
No, that's all right. I got my drink over here. Okay, I've got to try and switch out of sound engineer mode now.
Is this one good for me?
Yeah, I think they're both too loud, to be honest.
Really?
I'm just going to turn them down a little bit, yeah. Just so they're not making crazy noises. All right. Yeah, they're still very loud. Okay, so thank you everyone for coming along and for being patient with me continuing to interfere with the equipment, amongst other things. And I'd like to thank Anouk de Silva in particular for coming again. So as I think a lot of people know already, we did a launch of Anouk's book, The End of Madness, which there are copies of somewhere over there. I should probably put them out before now, which is a fictional account of an adult coming to realise that they have a neurodivergence, and in this case autism, and particularly coming to realise that, as I read the book anyway, through partly through observing themselves, but as much through observing the way that the rest of society treats them. And so when Anouk read from the book here a couple of months ago, and I kind of interviewed him about the book, and the audience had a bit of a conversation with him, it really prompted a lot of thinking about things that people that have been coming to this space for the 4 years that we've been here have been discussing to different degrees, which is particularly about what's generally called invisible disabilities or neurodivergence, and just things that people are perceived to be different for and then marginalised because of. And this is something I was already fairly passionate about myself. I used to be a health communicator, for example, and did work in disability and things like that. I've also since been diagnosed with ADHD myself, and I have children and other family and friends who are affected by different things. And increasingly I've seen how much, as I say, people are marginalised for their perceived condition or whatever, not because of who they actually are or even how that condition affects them. I think the best statement I ever heard on it was from one of the, I think it was one of the previous health disability commissioners, when we had a disability commissioner, who said to me at work once that the disability that people experience because of things like neurodivergence and other supposedly visible disabilities, the actual disability is generally caused not by their condition or their symptoms, but by the way that they are treated by the world because of those things. Sorry, I'm really annoying myself with this. So, you know, like that, yeah, people are marked as different and treated differently and marginalised, and that is the experience of disability. It's not, you know, for me, it's not the fact that I get distracted easily or hyper-focus on things. They can both be really helpful strengths, but yeah, being regarded as unstable or untrustworthy because I take a long time to get to the point or forget things, that is the experience of disability for me. So particularly because the conversation with Anouk about his book was then shared online as well, and a lot more people were interested in it, and I already really wanted to see this conversation happening. We both thought it would be great to come back. I mean, people really wanted to keep talking about the book for a start, and also the things that it was prompting us to think about. And also, as I say, there's just so many people who come here, having created this space primarily as a kind of sanctuary for myself, before I was even trying to make it a going concern. I feel like it seems to be a magnet for people with ADHD, created by someone with ADHD, which I think is really great. And a lot of people feel like it is a sanctuary, and a lot of people come here who have their own experience and expertise or passions that I just think we can all bring together and try and change that conversation. So I guess that today is very much about returning to what we had discussed and I guess having a bit of a recap, You're welcome to move that in front of you if
Yeah,
you want to. Sorry, I didn't mean for it to be away from you quite like that.
Let's make sure it's in the right spot.
And then really to open the floor. My view is that just because Anouk and I are sitting up here at the moment as a point of focus doesn't mean that we're meant to be controlling or directing things. I really want this space to always be about collaboration and collaboration in whatever ways people want to contribute. You know, there were people, for example, who I know were interested to be here today. There are a few people who are regulars but who are not necessarily comfortable being at an event with multiple strangers. And I really encourage them to text me or call me or just, you know, whatever, tell me beforehand, make sure you mention this or whatever. And likewise, any way that people would like to be heard or would like to make sure that we consider things or just have ideas, I think, and I'm speaking to people in the room as well as people who might be watching online now or later, to just come in and talk about it or give me a call or whatever, or speak to anyone that you see who's here. On that point, I should note that we are recording this, so, and the cameras are only pointed over here at the moment, but the sound is all being captured. And there is a microphone over there behind that camera that I'm pointing at, which is there so that when people do want to be part of the conversation, that not only us in the room can hear you, but that anyone who listens to the recording later can hear you, and anyone sitting out the back right now can hear you, and anyone across the street hopefully will hear you. So I'd prefer people do use the mic if they're going to speak. If you're not comfortable to, that's fine. But also just want people to know that if you walk over here, your image could get captured and broadcast, and if you're speaking to that microphone, your voice will get recorded and broadcast. Just think that's important that you know that before that happens. And now I'm mindful that I do talk a lot, and I definitely don't want to dominate the conversation today, though I did really want to say one thing in relation to that, which is that I want everyone who's here to know that this is typical in this space always, but especially with a conversation like this, that I really hope that people don't apologise for themselves, especially for aspects of their personality or their condition or whatever. Don't apologise for being yourself. Don't apologise for doing things that you know other people might find annoying or inconvenient, unless you feel like you've hurt someone or you actually feel bad about something and want to say sorry for it. But you know, I habitually apologise for talking too much, and I'm not going to do that. And I really want everyone here to not preface the way you speak or act. You know, if you want to go and have a nap out in the armchair, if you whatever, like, you don't have to apologise for anything. If you have to get up and leave, it doesn't matter. And so I will keep this as brief as I can, but I also am only doing that because I think it's a good thing for all of us, not because I have a problem with me. So what I would like to do now that we have started the event is acknowledge country, which I often take a long time to do because I have a problem with every aspect of how we acknowledge country and why we acknowledge country. That being that I think most people don't have any reason in their own mind or heart as to why they acknowledge country. I think most people do it now in Australia because they know it's the done thing and they know it's expected, and that's about it. And I'm starting to develop my own reasons for acknowledging country, but I also, you know, first and foremost started doing it because I know that it is something that is expected as a measure of respect. But I don't think you can really be showing people respect if you don't even know why you're doing it, not to a meaningful extent. So I won't pick apart every word like I often do in acknowledgement to country, but I will just say that for me, I think what's often referred to as the Indigenous question, or used to be, and which it is an awful phrase, but there's no statement that captures what that is referring to. But the question of lack of reconciliation and lack of recognition for what's happened to the original inhabitants of this country, and the fact that they are still, they still persist, and their cultures are the oldest cultures on the planet. Not just the oldest that still survive, but some of the first cultures ever on the planet, and they have survived all that time. So cultures and languages that have persisted for possibly 100,000 years. Archaeologists now say at least 70,000 years, and that's just because they can find physical objects. Compared with, you know, my own culture that I'm from, you can probably trace it back maybe 1,000 years, maybe 2,000 years, and the language doesn't persist in that time. So something is feeding back, and I think it's me. Anyway, so that question of how those people and cultures have been treated and continue to be treated and continue to be disregarded and disrespected, I think is the central problem for all of us who are on this continent, whether you're here for one day or born here or have always been here. I don't think we can grow as a society without addressing it, and so that's why I acknowledge country. And I'm mindful that talking about why I acknowledge country as well is making me the centre of it, but I don't normally address that at all. So with all that, I would like to, on behalf of this business, acknowledge country and also encourage everyone else here to acknowledge and reflect on the fact that we are on occupied land. It's the land of the Gadigal people, who are the rightful owners of the land, not just the traditional custodians. And that's under our current law, their original law, and the law of the British Empire at the time that the British invaded here. All three of those sets of laws say that this is their land. And so, as I say, I think it's really important that we acknowledge and reflect on that however you can throughout the event, especially when we're having an event that's all about people being excluded and marginalised by our society. So with that, I'm going to go and fiddle with the microphone because it's feeding back too much. And yeah, the acknowledgement of country to me is the most important part of an event. Anouk, you might like to say something while I'm mucking around with this microphone. Here's our cheat list. But yeah, I'll be back in a moment.
Yeah, no worries.
One of these is feeding back. Maybe it's you. Oh, who knows? Look, I'm going to try and fix it. You talk.
No, it's all good. We'll
Yeah, I know. I had left it on purpose, but I think it's too distracting.
I'll keep them in for fun. Who's actually read the novel? Hands up.
I've started.
I've read it.
Yes. Good.
Let's see if that's
We'll have a little Q&A.
Yeah, so I guess, well, maybe we should start by, does anyone else have anything they'd really like to flag or that, or say, in fact, you know, you're welcome to get up here and use these mics, especially if you would like to make sure that you're seen, but even if you don't care either way, I'd prefer people come up and speak in front of the camera. But I guess, you know, I've got my own little list of things that I think would be great to discuss, and Anouk's book is a really good starting point for us to talk about it. So as I say, we can kind of have a recap of that conversation.
Yep.
But maybe before we go too far down our own rabbit holes, if anyone, as I say, if there's just a burning point you'd like to make or an aspect of what I've just said that you think we really need to actually make sure we address, yell out. Yeah, go ahead. And again,
did you want to come up?
Either come up here or use that mic.
Is my mic okay now?
Yeah.
Can I just
let me do this?
Okay. You had something too, so you come up next. Thank you. Should be right now?
Damn it. Almost. There.
Cool.
And we do have a very long microphone lead on that microphone so that people don't have to stand up if they don't want. I can bring it to you.
So, hello, my name is Pietro, and while I am familiar with some of the terms that you've used in that book, specifically autism, tonight is the first time I came across the word or the term neurodivergence. Could you, in your elaboration, define this term, maybe say how, what are some of the characteristics of that, what are the particular types, because I'm assuming that autism is just a portion, a part of this more broader term.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that Oh, sorry.
That's all right.
That's okay.
Disposable anyway.
Important question. Thank you, Pietro.
Absolutely.
Michael, I think you should kick off.
Well, and I think also I'd like to point out that although I said I was a health communicator for 10 years, it was only in the latter part of that I was working in disability in particular. So I'm by no means an expert, on the health perspective. I feel like I've got a lot of experience and expertise as a consumer and as an advocate on behalf of friends and family. And basically, yes, you're right. I should have also, I'm surprised I said neurodivergent because I'm more typically say neurodiverse because the term divergent, it's acceptable. A lot of people do use neurodivergent, and the medical community in particular, that is still the accepted term. But you can see how that's not very far from deviant, really, to call someone divergent. Whereas diverse, obviously, so the implication or the suggestion of it, even from a medical sense, but also socially, is people who, and please don't take this as absolutely definitive, but basically it's generally seen as being either that your biochemistry is actually diverse, is different, a different makeup to normies in terms of typical brain composition, and that's certainly the case with, I think, with all ADHD. It can actually be diagnosed by scanning the brain and seeing the difference in the brain chemistry and or the biological structure of the brain. So people who've got diagnosis like I have, our brains respond differently to things like caffeine and to sunlight and things like that. And in particular your amygdala, which regulates emotion and mostly regulates emotion and impulse control, is different for people with ADHD compared to the norm, the plain vanilla norm that no one is. And I think that's an important point because two different people with ADHD will be very different to each other as well.
Just as two neurotypicals would be completely different.
Absolutely. But to your point, so absolutely things like autism, and again, we know autism is a very broad spectrum of behaviours and conditions, some of which are cultural in the sense that people are taught to behave in a certain way or to mask certain things or to suppress their own natural response to something in order to conform to, what's expected of people. And we've seen that a lot now with what they're calling this kind of epidemic of ADHD diagnoses, which is not just in this country but around the world. And that's fascinating because, as with autism, there's a very big gender divide. Women were much less likely to be identified with those conditions than men or boys. And I personally think a lot of that is because as a parent of 4 children and also as someone who became an uncle when I was still in high school, I've always observed that even when people aren't trying to tell kids that boys are better than girls or anything like that, like not trying to foster sexism as an imbalance, there's still a constant reinforcement of gender as significant. For example, if your kid does something well and you say good boy, which I always try to avoid, I'll say good kid or well done, particularly because you're not saying that their gender is the reason that they're being good, but you still mention their gender, it reinforces to them that you give some significance to it, and it's even more powerful in a sense because there's no explanation of the significance. Then when they go to school and they're told boys don't do that, girls don't do that, they put the two together and it reinforces it. And the reason I mention all of that is because, in our society, at least in most societies, young women and girls are really discouraged from being annoying, basically. They're told it's not ladylike, to shout or to climb trees or whatever. I mean, this is changing and there's some really great institutional examples of that changing. But fundamentally, I think that, and the reason I didn't get diagnosed with ADHD as a child is because I wasn't a typical boy. And for me and for a lot of women, my ADHD manifests as getting really distracted and daydreaming. So, you know, staring out the window, never finishing your work, but never being disruptive. And with so many of these conditions, even the fact that we refer to them as conditions or disorders, it's a reference to the fact that you're causing someone else a problem. It's not about what you need or who you are. It's like, why won't that kid up the back shut up? Or why is that one throwing chairs or whatever? We take them, we remove them, and we often medicate them or whatever, but, you know, like, try to remove the problem for everyone else. So if you're actually just staring out the window all day and eventually get your work done, or are known to be very smart and just often forget things, you get let through a lot, which happened to me right up until the HSC, and then I failed the HSC because there was no second chance, really. And then I did it again and failed again. And as I say, I think that is probably experience for a lot of these other people who never got picked up, because it's much more acceptable for a young woman to be daydreamy or whatever, or be drawing, you know, on their work, than to be running around smashing things. And if they're not running around smashing things, they're not causing a problem for anyone else. And likewise with autism, I think it's there's just always an expectation, particularly for women, but also for people who want to take responsibility for themselves in the world, which certainly was me, to not annoy people and just put up with it, you know, like, too bad if you're struggling, you're the last person who matters, especially once you're a parent. But yes, so in my way, I didn't mean to apologise for myself, but sorry if I wandered off the path, but what you said is accurate. Like, neurodivergence or neurodiversity is about conditions like that. I'm trying to think of any others, there's plenty. Yeah, go ahead. And actually, yeah, come up. And I also meant to say this at the start when I said I'm not going to apologise for talking so much, is that the other half of that I meant to say to everyone is that my children, my family, my customers, my staff, everyone who knows me knows that it is fine to just interrupt me sometimes, or just say, okay, thank you, because I will fill the empty space before anyone else can. So I'm really glad that you put your hand up. Thank you.
Yeah, just jump in, everyone.
Yeah.
There's not really any place to stand.
Oh, sorry, yeah, here I go. I'm going to make a really horrible noise now.
Let's make it comfy.
There you go.
I'll try to be very brief, as I'm conscious that Enoch hasn't said a word, and we're all here to listen to him speak, so I'll be brief.
Are we?
Yeah.
On the topic of neurodivergence, and also on the back of acknowledging the country, I want to sort of tether these things a bit alongside my lived experience as someone who's been diagnosed by medical institutions as having ADHD and autism. And, you know, in diagnostic terms, this might be framed as an over-focus on detail, adverse reaction to small stimuli, yes, sensory overload, that sort of thing. But the way I self-identify with that experience is that I just naturally have a smaller aperture with which to view the world, and it's very quick to overflow, because my sensory system is not built for a world that's so volatile and so harsh and always changing and so big. And so I think pre-colonially I wouldn't have been struggling, I would have just been chilling. And so when I think about justice for neurodivergent people, I also think about restoring justice to the world in general, and restoring ways of life that are more conducive to all of our nurture.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Well
That's
said.
a great point.
Yeah, really the crux of my work is, look, I don't shy away from it, it's political, because whatever we face, and this applies to any marginalised group, but I think whatever we face isn't going to be addressed within a certain framework the framework that exists in the world today. Because, well, for one thing, we're sort of split into, you know, we're split up in all sorts of ways, you know, by country, they can find as many ways as they can to divide us. And really the division that exists, that's emerging is the class divisions, because what's happening on this planet is, you know, a handful of I've probably words I shouldn't say.
Privileged people.
Yeah, well, you can call them what you want,
Self-privileged.
but we know what they're up to, and if you don't have to go digging very far anymore to find out. And so we're all at risk of that, and I think we're all vulnerable. The crux of my work wanted to sort of bring out autism as something that it's not something talked about, and conversations around autism are problematic because they begin usually with presumptions, right? The basic presumption is that the condition is the problem. Now this, with any condition, any medical condition, the condition is the problem. Say you have a broken leg, obviously the broken leg is the problem. But this doesn't apply to neurodiversity. Neurodiversity isn't the problem. The problem is in the conditions that aggravate the symptoms that come out of neurodiversity. And so if we want to get to the root of what's troubling neurodivergent people or neurodiverse people, autistic people, ADHD people, we have to look at what they're confronting, what their senses are perceiving, and why that is the case. Why? Because people take for granted that certain social conditions are in place and they're fixed and there's nothing you can do about them and there's no changing it. But that has proven throughout history to be not the case. And so, we're in desperate times again. When people are driven by desperate times, they're driven to desperate action, as we saw a year ago in Sri Lanka, where my family comes from. There was a spontaneous uprising of the masses that drove a decade-long dictatorship. This was a family that was, nepotism, greed, anything, one of the worst arch-fiend organizations in Asia. And a week later, 3 weeks later, the masses are swimming in the president's swimming pool, and he's fucked off to Belgium. And so people don't understand the power they have collectively when they start to talk about things and realize what common interests they have, and that really what we're confronting isn't just something you experience as an individual or, this happened to me, but it's something that's being perpetuated, and it's being perpetuated culturally by the media. If you look at representations of autistic people in film and in even literature, it's it's very questionable.
And often not written by those people.
Right, exactly. And we have neurotypicals portraying us. There are cases where they do a good job if they do enough research into it. But the problem is we're not even known the essence of us, and it's problematic because even science is still developing and finding out things about us. And so to really be on the ball, you have to follow that process and follow the science and realize that it's really not the condition that is the problem. In fact, we see it, I think we talked about this last time, as advantageous, because
absolutely
what we are equipped with enables us to produce things that someone with not quite the same wiring wouldn't be able to produce. But at the same time, in order to produce it, we probably suffer a lot more and tire ourselves out a lot more to get the same thing done.
And that's, I am going to keep this brief. I'm not going to respond to everything that everyone says. What was your name, sorry? Naomi? I'm really glad that you raised that, because it is, you highlighted a couple of things that other people have pointed out to me before that I had kind of forgotten about, and also prompted Anouk to say a few things I thought were really important. One is that point about, once you recognise that industrialisation and therefore unsustainable use of resources is an aspect of colonialism, and so as a lot of Indigenous groups have said around the world, climate change is a result of colonialism. It's a form of colonialism, which might sound extreme, but if you actually look at the cause and effect of what's happening, unless you don't agree with climate change as a fact, it is unquestionably the case that we're destroying the planet because we started burning coal, which wasn't that long ago that we started doing anything on an industrial scale. And so that is an aspect of colonialism, but also it connects to something that one of the kids I know said to me recently, and she has OCD and anxiety, but she's very interested in sort of advocating on behalf of others as well who get marginalised because of their apparent conditions. I can't remember exactly what she said, but she basically made me consider whether things like neurodiversity might be an evolutionary response to our society. And certainly things like, this is one of the only businesses that is open at this time. As I tell everyone else shuts at 3. You can only get a coffee here into the evening, and that's because I don't function well in the mornings. I function much better at night, and I like having coffee at night, and clearly other people do too. But since industrialisation, more and more our society has been, at least in Anglophone countries, that you work 9 to 5. That is when you're supposed to function. So if you don't function like that, you're immediately at greater risk of all sorts of disadvantages. And then I just wanted to say on what Anouk said about we're not even seen and that it's not always a disadvantage. I mean, autism is a great example because there are professions, and I meant to double check exactly what they are, but especially in industrial engineering and things like that, where employers are now preferencing people with autism. They're seeking to recruit them, and it's not out of any kind of altruism, it's because they're better at the job because of the way they think and the way they perceive. And likewise, I was a security guard for 13 years and I loved it, and I believe I was really good at it. I never screwed up. I never had to fight anyone despite some really scary situations. And I believe that the reason I was good at being a security guard is because I can stare at a wall for 12 hours and not get bored, but also notice like an insect crawling by at the same time. And so when you're just there in case something happens, I'm really good for that. And that was part of what this was all about, even trying to find the language to discuss it. As you say, like this presumption that people are automatically disadvantaged or a weakness is wrong. And we started saying maybe we should call this "I am stronger for my disability" in quotation marks, or "you are stronger for my disability," because we all have things to offer, whether we're neurodiverse or not. Everybody in the world does. And so I just wanted to finish by saying my suggestion for how everyone should approach the conversation is, whoever anyone is, it should be, okay, what skills or passions do you have that the rest of us can benefit from, and what do we have that might benefit you because of things that you don't have strength in? If we approached everyone from that fundamental principle, then everyone would have a place, everyone would contribute, and everyone would be supported.
That's right. So when we talk about neurodiversity or neurodivergence, we're talking about brains that function and operate differently to the overwhelming majority of human brains, right? And so when I say we, the neurodiverse or neurodivergent tend to be, and this is not fixed, it's not in stone, which is another issue because these are tendencies. They're not, they don't necessarily apply to 100% of autistic people, but generally, as a general guideline, neurodivergent people are extremely sensitive. And when we say sensitive, we're talking about everything. It's hard to make people understand, but
a sensitive instrument notices more.
Yeah. Look, we have to think of an example so people have some idea. But that is
those motorbikes.
Sirens, I cannot stand. Look, you'll notice autistic people often wear sunglasses or headphones, especially when they're in a crowded or outdoor area, because what we're experiencing, what we're taking in, is so much more intense than the average brain, if there is such a thing, which there isn't. But so most people wouldn't be particularly aggravated, say, by these lights, but an autistic person might be and might not be able to be in this room. Another degree of sensitivity is not being able to be around other people, which is an extreme sort of, I won't say end of the spectrum because the spectrum isn't linear, but that portion of the spectrum, this whole idea of high functioning and low functioning is also problematic because different people struggle with different things. I am extremely high functioning when it comes to writing, doing stuff like this, which a lot of people wouldn't be able to manage. But then I get lost when I go shopping. So when I used to drive, I used to get lost all the time. Same route. I'm going to my friends. I still get lost.
Yeah.
And I couldn't explain it. And you hit on something important then, that neurodivergence or neurodiversity is probably an evolutionary response to society and to society as it is developing historically. And so what we're finding, the world we confront today, it's extremely intense, right? Even to a neurotypical person, everything that's going on, it has to affect you in some way because for most people conditions are just plummeting. You know, we've been through 3 years of a pandemic we're being told is over and people are still getting sick and dying from. So approaching a nuclear war that no one's talking about. So there's no way something that potentially extinguishes life on the planet isn't going to affect you at some level psychologically, even if you're one of those people that doesn't give a shit and just wants to get through life. Because you have some interest in life continuing on this planet and continuing in a sustainable form. And that is not the direction that we're going in. Now, throughout history, neurodivergent, autistic brains have been at the forefront of some of the most innovative you know, in the realms of art, science, mathematics, engineering, as you mentioned. You know, we've sort of been the brains behind, and up till, say, the Renaissance, you would think these are the sort of people that are gonna kind of not drive society, but, you know, change the world and make it
Inspire.
Yeah, you know, make us want to continue in this. And that has disappeared for a century or two. And it is no coincidence that, look, industrialization had its role, but now its role is openly destructive, and there's no scaling it back. What we have to do is sort of find a way. Why is this happening? Who's behind it, and whose hands are the resources of society in, and who's being served by them? Because it's really not coming our way. When we talk about, you know, accommodations and all that, there's nothing really, you know, happening. And I'm not saying you throw money at a problem and solve it. That's not what I'm suggesting at all. I'm talking about the management of resources and taking for granted that certain social and political conditions must be in place, because I don't think we can afford to do that anymore. I think everything's on the table, and look, if a government's kind of causing, you know, this kind of is clearly not acting in the welfare of the population, then there's absolutely no reason to have it sitting there making decisions that affect people's lives. I've never seen why people buy into this. Never been able to see it.
Yeah, and you did though say before as well that people.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Go
I'm
ahead.
not a conspiracy theorist, by the way. So I just want to make that clear. I'm not one of these, you know, it's all Illuminati kind of thing. No, this is an objective thing. Please.
I was just going to say, and it ties to what you just said, that you said before people don't realise how much impact they can have, and I think a lot of things that come up do sound like a conspiracy, but I think that something that we shouldn't assume is that when someone's talking about something sounding like, a concerted attempt to harm people, that means it's intentional. Like a lot of the people who facilitate institutionalised trauma and marginalisation, they don't necessarily think that they're doing that, and they're not necessarily trying to.
Yeah.
It's a conspiracy of a failure to act.
That's
it's a conspiracy of laziness and lazy thinking. It's not, like you say, it's not an Illuminati going, how do we fuck these people up? It's just everybody.
It flows from history,
doing
and, you know,
whatever.
certain hands are behind. But like in the end of madness, that's reflected in the pastoress Teresa, because she's sort of been sent there to proselytize and console people and sort of bring them to God. And someone like Saul, who has probably lived long enough and been through enough not to even care about that anymore. Like he's not only left God, but he couldn't give a shit. And so that's problematic, because how do you make that connection with someone whose suffering hasn't taken them into faith, has taken them in an opposite direction? And that doesn't mean he doesn't have any hope in him, but he's lost that sort of will, and she's trying to supplement that with God, and that's not working. And so where do you go from there? And
so I think that's a good point at which to ask everyone something that I personally think would be great to get from not just today but this whole project, which is, well, whether people have their own ideas, but also even before that, if people know of examples where people who do have some kind of power are doing something differently, where, you know, there is a concrete step that's being taken that either reduces the marginalisation or, you know, reduces suffering, or, you know, in some way tries to change this overwhelming institutionalised abuse, I guess, without needing to have a revolution or something. You know, like just by going, here, I've got control of this and I've made things different.
Yeah, I mean, in theory it's possible. I would.
Well, I can think of examples. That
yeah,
I know
absolutely.
Of.
Yeah.
Sorry, I kept banging that microphone. But again, I don't want to start on a whole another monologue, so I would much rather hear other people who either have ideas or, especially concrete examples, I think are really good of being able to go, this is actually being done and makes that difference. Matt?
Yeah, well, I had a few things I wanted to mention because you touched on 3 points which relate to me.
Please,
on a
go ahead.
personal level. So with Michael's acknowledgement to country, that's very important to me. And when I talk about what I'm going to talk about next, I don't think people always listen to me, because then one of their first questions is, do you have Aboriginal blood? And I say, no, listen to me again. I don't have any Aboriginal blood, but I have a third cousin who's half Aboriginal. And then they stop and think, and it's like, oh, okay, that makes sense. So my third cousin's mother was an Aboriginal lady, and she married my mother's second cousin. So that's how I'm related to Jamie. So people say, oh, why are you so passionate about Aboriginal affairs? Well, you're not Aboriginal, why are you worried? Well, I'm not, and I would be anyway, even if I didn't have a third cousin. But it makes it more important to me on a personal level because of that connection. Also with the Asperger's, which you mentioned in the novel, coinciding with me reading the last bit of your novel, and you mentioned the Asperger's thing in there, I saw a doco about the guy who came up with the idea for measuring IQ, and he was a eugenicist. So people wander around and say, oh, what is your IQ? Like it's something really important.
Yeah.
And Isaac Asimov, the science fiction writer, said the most annoying people he knew were people that he came into contact with because he was a member of Mensa. And he said Mensa people are very annoying. So this whole thing of like wandering around thinking you're superior because of your intellect or whatever is a very off-putting thing. It's very elitist. So my niece and my younger sister both are diagnosed on the spectrum. So Michelle has Asperger's syndrome, and that's given her a lot of problems. But I think the problems she's had from the rest of us, including the family, including me, has been from us not fully understanding the nature of what she did. Because you think, oh, why aren't you behaving like a so-called normal person? Then you have to remind yourself, well, that they're on a different way of looking at things. So just because they don't perceive the world or have the same bunch of attitudes. So it's taken a lot of work for me to understand my sister and to get, for us to become closer, because I don't want any friction just because I may not be understanding certain things she's going through. And my niece doesn't like the label she's been given. She got diagnosed, and so she just thinks of herself as someone that suffers from extreme social anxiety. And that way she deals with instead of getting to the point where both my younger sister and my niece, have felt like, oh, I feel like I'm stupid, or, I want to end my life. That kind of extremity. So the rest of the family all care about them very much. But that's within a family context. I think in a broader thing, when people go out and try to act in so-called normal ways, they're dealing with a further layer of, well, this person has no mileage in caring about me because it's not my mother, it's not my sister, it's not my brother or my uncle. They can just ignore me. And so it makes the battle harder. So Zoe and Michelle know that they can sit down and talk to any one of us, and we have a degree of understanding, because we had to look at this and say, oh, okay, well, we've got this thing, how do we deal with it? So making them feel valued in the things they do is very important.
Absolutely.
So Michelle does hobbies, which is diamond art. I don't even know what that is, but you get little beads and the artwork, whatever it is, is kind of already outlined, and you get a little tool and you put the particular colour beads in, and then it'll be an owl or a horse or whatever it is. That's very therapeutic for her. And Zoe goes into her room and she likes to invent characters. And so she's all these different people at once, and they'll have a conversation. And sometimes when she was younger, she used to do it with different dolls, and this one would have something. So she's quite comical. But yeah, she just experiences conflict with her sisters and with some of her schoolmates that she doesn't get along with. Because of what you said earlier, is that she doesn't have a filter.
Yeah.
She says exactly how she feels, and sometimes that's hilarious because everyone else is thinking that, but oh yes, we're bound by polite manners and stuff, so we're not going to say that kind of thing. So
yeah, I think this. Sorry to interrupt, but
No, that's
you've raised something important. The question of politeness, because I think my view is this entire society is completely hypocritical. They talk about politeness and respect. Look around you, man. Seriously,
Yeah.
And you go on social media, people have a go at you. Oh, you can't be rude and this and that. Really? Like the level of gaslighting that we experience is, I can't even describe it. But it's like people are constantly messing with your head, and there's no reason to stand for that when you already got so much going on in there.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it pays not to be nice.
That's true.
I've had to just sacrifice that at times because there's no other way that I'm going to get past that, and it's just going to keep playing until I resolve it.
Yeah.
And if that takes some degree of, no.
Yeah, well, often no one else is going to stand up for
That's
you.
the way things work out.
Yeah, you have to be assertive. And that's the thing.
That's what
Like
we're
you said,
missing. That's what we're missing.
Everyone's like, oh, I don't like this situation, you're getting out of hand, you're raising your voice and this and that.
Well,
and they're trying to
there's a reason for
calm
it.
you down.
Yeah.
And yet you have a perfectly valid reason for acting and feeling the way you do.
Absolutely. Because we know instinctively what distress is. We know it from birth. And we don't know that we know it until we get diagnosed.
Yeah.
We don't know why we're going through, and so we're in distress. But even after you're diagnosed, you still have the condition. It doesn't change, And
that hypersensitivity is often also shown in a heightened compassion for others as well.
Absolutely.
And so that distress
feel
is
other
often
people's-
seeing other people suffer.
Yes.
Like,
For me, people don't believe this when I tell them, but watching another person suffering is far more upsetting for me than anything I've gone through. I can handle everything I've gone through if I had to go through it again. But watching my friends and comrades suffering, sometimes I have to go off social media because it's just too much. Because I'm looking at what they're going through and it's in my head, and then I make a story out of it and I look at what their day must be like.
Yeah,
Please.
that's happened to me a lot lately.
Yeah.
Like people say, oh, how are you going, Matthew? And I said, well, I feel fine.
Yeah.
Everything's going fine
But-
in my world. But they say, so what's the problem? I'm saying, well, this friend's sick, this one's got an inoperable brain tumor, she doesn't know how long she's got to live.
Right.
you know, my sister's unhappy, this and that. You're like, oh, what, let that bother you? And the focus always returns to, oh, you have to be thinking of number one.
Yeah.
This is what the new, what's the word, I can't think of it, but this is the new kind of attitude.
That rugged individualism.
Yeah, like just...
Yeah, that's understandable.
You know,
It's also a bit of dog eat dog.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah,
like,
dog
and
eat
that
dog.
gets back
This
to what
is
you
the
were
world we
saying
live in.
about when there's a crisis.
Yeah.
A large portion of any community does turn into dog eat dog.
Yeah. But that's not getting us anywhere.
No, and one of the things that you said that I think is really important, back to when I asked people to start contributing at this moment, was that you did give us a concrete example of how people are changing it. And it's, as you said, your family had to not just show compassion and consideration, but had to learn, had to self-reflect, realise that you didn't know what you thought you knew about those conditions and what those people needed. And that's a really critical thing that I've become aware of first through watching Family and Friends, and then as a health communicator. The entire society has a degree of bigotry towards everyone for some reason, but especially towards people with invisible disabilities or mental health issues in particular. And as was taught to me by an academic, that persists throughout society. But what a lot of people don't realise is that it's even worse amongst the medical community. And not just the medical community, but the health workforce generally, but especially medical practitioners. So you meet someone on the street and tell them that you're a bit worried that your mind's not right. They might be a bit, but they might help you, they might not, though hopefully be fairly respectful. You say that to a doctor, anything you say after that, they're very unlikely to listen to you or give you any credibility, because you've just told them that in their eyes you can't be trusted with anything. And I don't mean that to disparage doctors. I think there's a really complex reason that happens, and part of it is that they are taught very much that you can't be the solution and the problem.
Yeah.
You can't be the healer if you are the wounded. And so that's part of why doctors are much less likely to ask for help or to admit that they're going through depression or anxiety or anything like that, because they see that as, well, a lot of them see that as saying that you are incapable of doing their job, that you are the other side of the equation, you're the problem that they need to rescue. And so, but it is actually, research has shown that persistent bigotry throughout our community is worse in the medical community. And you expect that they would know better, but they don't, not unless they happen to have done a lot of extra work. And even the ones that are psychiatrists and stuff don't actually necessarily know jack shit about particular experiences or conditions.
It's quite alarming, really.
Yeah. And when you're a family that wants to help a loved one, I had a similar experience where our whole family were like, well, we go to the doctors, we ask for help. And actually it was fucking the worst thing in the world to do at that time. It was, I'm not saying you shouldn't speak to medical practitioners, but just assuming that they know best is not
you shouldn't
always
assume.
good.
Look, some of the experiences we have are just mind-boggling. I mean, I was only diagnosed... You're next. I was only diagnosed 3 years ago, right? So, and look, for years I was going to doctors and therapists, psychologists, not a single one ever thought that I might be autistic or neurodiverse. It was never raised. And I display all the symptoms. I'm aware that I do. All the basic symptoms, right? The common ones. And it was never. And these are doctors, these are psychiatrists, psychologists. So something is going on at a level where we're not getting, I wouldn't say attention, but because we do get attention, most of it's negative, unfortunately. But obviously more research needs to be done. But there's a culture, as Michael's pointed out, in the medical community that disparages neurodiversity and neurodivergence. And I think it's related to why we experience society the same way we do, because our brains are capable of coming up with perhaps solutions to what we're going through that are not considered acceptable or are officially frowned upon or require major, if not a revolution, major reconstruction of society, right? Now that is against the interests of those who are profiting from this society. And look, they're not, we've seen what they're prepared to do and capable of, so they're not going to, give any ground either.
Well, a lot of people who become doctors have to work very, very hard to do that and have to have a lot of privilege in order to even be in a position to work that hard.
Yeah, a lot of them are born into
it. You need a lot of money. You still need to not have to pay rent so that you can focus on uni anyway. And then you've got to work really long hours, all that sort of stuff. And you've got to be told that you're capable. You've got to be encouraged your whole life. So you're asking them to give up all of that elite prestige, that some of which is earned, some of which is not.
Yeah, and also because the knowledge around autism it's not developed enough.
No, well, and maybe part of the problem is that it is predominantly treated as a medical thing. Like, clearly, that's so much of what Naomi was highlighting as well. Like, it's
the pathologization of something that's not necessarily just a pathology, but it is actually something deeper than that, and is a fundamental part of being human.
Yeah, and is not necessarily essential to, not completely essential to that person, but is all these external, generational issues.
Right. And so what we're talking about is the cultural and social conditions that we confront, how that impacts us, how that impacts our symptoms, and hinders us from moving about in the world.
And how can we change that? So again, if people have things that they want to mention with regards to that, or Pietro, but anyone, and it doesn't have to be right now, and also I'm mindful that I told you all you're going to be recorded if you talk, but we will turn the recording off at some point as well tonight, so then people feel like it's less formal and we can all just chat with each other if we want to, but also people who want to talk to the group but don't want to be recorded, we still want to hear you, very much so.
Pietro?
So first of all, I want to thank you for your presentation, and I'm glad I came along tonight. And this has probably been the first time that I've had an occasion to listen to this particular topic. And it's given me a lot of cause for reflection. So can I tell you a little bit about my story?
Absolutely.
So I'm a school teacher, and I work at a school in the Wollongong area. I'm not going to mention its name, but at that school we have a section of the school which is kind of quarantined away from the rest of the general student population. Those students are diagnosed with some kind of mental condition. So they've been diagnosed medically, okay? So a psychiatrist has read reports written by teachers, okay? And then the psychiatrist has made a diagnosis of particular students. And once those diagnoses are made, those students are kind of directed into a particular separate section of the school, and so their curriculum changes, even though we still teach subjects which are ostensibly and in name are the same as the subjects which I teach. However, they have different outcomes, different criteria, different expectations, and so on. But those students are treated differently.
Yeah.
Right? They're quarantined. Now, now I think about this a lot. Okay, I think about this, and then I think sometimes. So the students that I teach, sometimes I recognise particular behaviours which are consistent with students who are in this kind of quarantine section. So then I think, you know what, and that gets me thinking about a lot of things, such as the extent of how pervasive these mental conditions are in our society.
Yep.
And which then raises another question, which is, and this is the issue that both of you are raised tonight, which I really agree with. That it's not so much, it's not these conditions which are the problem, it's society itself, right? But to be able to draw that conclusion, you need to have a macro view of the world. You have to have a big picture view. If you look at individuals, say, I acknowledge problems with myself. Right? And I'm the teacher. And I'm supposed to be the one who is sane, right? And the model of behaviour. And I have to say that I'm not always that, I react, and sometimes I react badly, not because I'm a bad person, but because I care, right? So, and then the other thing I wanted to raise, which, so you mentioned, for example, that medical professionals don't respond well to, I don't know, psychiatry or diagnoses of the...
As a tendency, like they tend to avoid seeking counselling and even revealing to anyone that they're struggling, and they tend to view anyone who does struggle with anything like that as therefore basically a failure. That's part of why they won't admit to it themselves.
So you know what, even within my occupation, right, we're always under stress. Our jobs are incredibly difficult. So I'm always under stress. And every time someone sees me and they say, Pedro, are you okay? And maybe an event occurred, and then they would offer counselling, right? And so there are avenues for counselling in our occupations. But I never take those opportunities. Why? Because I know that counselling is not going to be a solution. Because the problem is actually bigger. It's pervasive.
Absolutely.
It's absolutely pervasive. And this gets back. And the other thing is, a couple of years ago, I had prepared an acknowledgement of country speech, right? And I wrote it, and so everyone was encouraged to write an acknowledgement of country and present it, right? And I found a lot of those acknowledgement of countries were, how can I put it, were tokenistic. So they were saying, I went to Uluru, I had a great holiday, and it was just fantastic.
Took a selfie.
There was another teacher last week, she described how she went up to the Great Barrier Reef, and she went on this great cruise through the reef, okay? And the reason why it was such a great cruise was because the craft that she was travelling on had an Aboriginal flag, and they recounted these Dreamtime stories. So I found that really tokenistic. So I wrote an acknowledgement of country that acknowledged the pain and the suffering of Aboriginal Australians. And I don't know if people remember, but there was an incident in Western Australia where Rio Tinto is one of the largest miners in Australia.
In the world,
even in the world. So they blew up an Aboriginal archaeological, like a sacred site. They blew it up, right, as part of their mineral exploration. They blew that up, and I put that in my acknowledgement of country. I put that in.
Good on you.
And I showed it. Now, I knew that my acknowledgement of country was going to be controversial, so I got another teacher to look at it, and I got her opinion on it. And because it was a Christmas party at my work, she said, no, better not, because it's a happy occasion.
Of course, don't want to spoil the occasion.
But you know what? You know what I'm going to do? I'm not going to tell them. Next time I'm doing it, I'm not going to tell anybody I'm doing it.
That's it.
I'm going to let them know, because all of these, and so what's the point that I'm trying to make here? The problem are not the autistic. The problem are not the ones with Asperger's, right? The problem is not, the medical doctors. The problem is society. The problem is society. And we're supposed to all function as individuals within this kind of mad world. And to be perfectly honest, it's impossible.
Spot on.
That's my point.
So thank you, Pietro. You've hit on something important there. Two things, I think. I find it troubling that students are sectioned off the way you described. I don't know if is that even legal? Okay, so when I went back to uni to do my master's in teaching, we had a subject called inclusive education. And the idea was marginalised people, so neurodivergent or people with disabilities, all in the same classroom, right? And taught with mainstream kids. That was the idea. Now, some people were against that because their argument was, how can those kids get the specialist attention they deserve and these kids still get taught at the same level that they're being taught? So it's problematic. And are these teachers even trained to deal with these conditions? Probably not, right? You're not a medical practitioner as a teacher. You don't have that kind of training. You might not even understand. Who understands autism, really? I mean, and you can't expect that. And so, yeah, that's troubling. I don't know. Are you allowed to speak about that? No. Do you teach those kids that are sectioned off? Sectioned off.
Yeah, thanks. If you use the mic, that'd be great. You're welcome to just take it off the stand and sit down with it if you want.
Yeah, just grab it.
I know. I think others.
Yeah, sure.
So, yes, I have taught them before their diagnosis. So, diagnosis is the first step. Once you require a psychiatrist who has obviously a doctor specialising in mental processes.
Yes.
Right? I'm not in that position. So if I had certain suspicions about particular behaviour, they are referred to people who are more expert than I am, and then it goes to a psychiatrist. A psychiatrist writes a report. Then funding is allocated to that particular student. That student is then admitted into I call it quarantine, but it's not really. It's not like a fence. It's not. They're not quarantined in another part of the campus. The rooms are adjacent to the ones where I work in. However,
they're separate.
They're separate. Okay, and they have different teachers. I don't have those classes. Okay, I don't teach those classes. So yes, I have taught them, but pre-diagnosis.
It's.
You understand that?
Absolutely, it's problematic because what you're describing actually reminds me of in the UK they have what they call behavioural units or pupil referral units, but that isn't necessarily for diagnosed kids. It's for anyone who plays up in class, right? And as you say, we don't know if they're on the spectrum when they're kids, right, without a diagnosis. And you're observing the same tendencies in your mainstream classroom as you do in, so, really what purpose is it serving? And it's problematic. But that's just one example, but that's a good one, and I'm glad you brought it up. What was the other thing? I've forgotten what it was.
We might...
Anyway.
Yeah, I was going to say we might either have a break or just have a break and see if people want to continue with the kind of more formal side of things or just make it more informal. So as I say, I'm really conscious that the recording and application process restricts people's ability to participate, and
you can stop recording.
I just mean it turns it into a
I think we should talk about my book. The issue with the royalties, which I wanted to get into.
Okay, so do you want to?
We'll have a break.
Have a break first? Okay, sure.
I need them.
All right. So if anybody, if anybody wants a drink or something to eat or whatever, now's a good time to let me know. And thank you both, all three of you, for your contributions.